Good morning. In this video, we'll continue with the first chapter of the English Supplementary Reader, Footprints Without Feet. So the chapter that we are going to continue with is A Triumph of Surgery. So we'll start from page number 3. So let's start. At the surgery, the household dogs surged around me. Surged means gathered. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes, and when put down lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing round him for a few seconds, decided that he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. So now in this, what is given here is when Dr. Harriet took Tricky to his house, so that time the other dogs who were there in the house, they gathered around Tricky. And Tricky, what he did was, like, he was quite weak that time. So when the doctor did put him down on the carpet, so that time he could not move. He was just lying motionless on that carpet. So other dogs, what they did was, they were just sniffing around him. Sniffing means smelling with nose. So now they were just moving around him and they were just smelling him. But those dogs, the other dogs, they sniffed around him and thought that he was just an uninteresting object. And what they did was they just ignored Tricky and they went away from there. I made up a bed for him in a warm, loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days, I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third day, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in his yard. So now in this, what is given here is whimper means to cry in pain. So now in this, what is given here is, in this it is given, the narrator, what he did was, he made, like when the other dogs, they moved away from him, so he made a bed for him in a loose box, and the other dogs were also kept there, so he made a bed for him there. And what the narrator did was, he kept an eye, he kept watching each and every movement of Tricky. And what he did was, like, he did not give him anything to eat, but it was only water that he was given. So now, like, for 2 days, he just survived on water. And it is at the end of the second day, Tricky also like started moving around. And third day, what he did was, like, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs who were there in the yard. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friends. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. So now in this, what is given here is, in this it is given, when the narrator, he saw that Tricky was also taking interest. So what he did was, he opened the door and Tricky trotted means moved. So he just moved out and they were, like, he was engulfed. Engulfed means surrounded. So when he moved out, so that time he was surrounded by Joe, the greyhound. Greyhound is a hunting dog. So he was, like, surrounded by Joe and his friends. So then what they did was, they just moved around, they smelled him, they inspected him, and they just, then after that, they were there in the garden. And Tricky also, what they did was, Tricky, he also followed them. And Tricky was not able to move also, because he was quite he was quite an overfed dog, so he was not able to move properly also, but still he followed the greyhound and his friends. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowls. There was the usual headlong rush, followed by the sounds of the high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. So now in this, what is given here is, so like when the dogs were fed, so that time the narrator was also present there. And what he did was, he saw that when Tristan, he was putting the food in the bowls. So that was the time there was the dogs were eating it, and they were eating it with a good speed, because everybody knew that if he would not eat, then he would be left behind and there will be no food left for him. It would be the other other dogs. They would have eaten the food. When they had finished, Tricky took a walk round the shining bowls, licking casually inside one or two of them. Next day, an extra bowl was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. So now in this, what is jostling means? So jostling means pulling. So now in this, what is given here is, when those dogs, they had finished, so that was the time Tricky got up and he just moved around the bowls that were left, in which there was no food. They were just shining bowls. So those dogs had licked the food that was served to them. So now what happened is, next day there was an extra bowl that was kept for Tricky, and the narrator, he was quite happy that he could see him moving around. He was making his own way and just to have the food. From then on, his progress was rapid. He had no medicinal treatment of any kind, but all day he ran about with the dogs, joining in the friendly scrimmages. So now in this, what is given here is, scrimmages means fights. So now in this, what is given here is, in this it is given, the narrator, Dr. Harriet, he could see that there was an improvement in Tricky's condition. And although he was not given any medicine, what he did was, he was there with the other dogs. So he went around, he ran with the other dogs, and he was there in their friendly fights. He discovered the joys of being bowled over, tramped on, and squashed every few minutes. He became an accepted member of the gang, an unlikely, silky little dog among the shaggy crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtimes and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. He had never had such a time in his life. So now in this, what is given here is, in this, it is given, in this, it is given that there was an improvement in his condition. So earlier what happened is, he was fed by Mrs. Pumphrey after without moving. So he was putting on weight. He had become quite obese, and he was not able to move. But now, as he was moving around, he was quite happy also. The other members who were there, they accepted him, and they also involved him in all the activities. So he was a silky little object among the shaggy crew. Shaggy means unkempt, drooping, rough hair. So now in this, what is given here is, in this it is given that he was a silky little object among the shaggy crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtimes and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. So now what he used to do is, he used to fight with the other animals. he used to at the meal times when these people when the dogs were served the food, so that time he was quite active, he wanted his share. And after that he used to hunt the rats also in the house at night time. So earlier he had never ever experienced such a life in his such a time in his life. All the while, Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. I dodged to question about whether the cushions were being turned regularly, or his correct coat worn according to the weather. But I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convulsing rapidly. So now in this, what is given here is, in this it is given like this Mrs. Pumphrey, she was very much worried about her dog. So she used to call up the doctor a dozen times in a day, and she wanted to know about the well-being of the dog. So she just wanted to know whether the cushions were given to the dog, whether he was made to wear the correct coat according to the weather, and that this doctor, like he used to tell Mrs. Pumphrey that the dog was now out of danger and he was recovering rapidly. The word convulsing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pumphrey. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. For a happy period, my partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast, but when the bottle of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. So now in this, what is given here is, in this it is given, like Mrs. Pumphrey, when she heard that he was recovering, so what she did was she started bringing eggs, and there were around a dozen eggs that she used to bring. And she also started bringing brandy. So the narrator and his partner, they used to have 2 eggs in the morning for the breakfast. And when the bottle of the wine also was sent by Mrs. Pumphrey, so that was the time these people, they started enjoying. So like she started sending wine to enrich Tricky's blood. So these people, they used to have that wine, and the lunch was a ceremonial occasion, that it was a time for celebration for the narrator and his friend. And these people, they used to have 2 glasses of wine before, and during the meal also they used to have a lot of wine.